How to really transform your money story. Welcome back to the Path to Purpose podcast with Dr. Katja Rusanen. In today's episode, we are exploring how to transform your money story so that you can live your purpose. I'm excited to introduce our guest, Stef Garvin, who is an abundance story architect. From burnout to breakthrough, Stef alchemizes numbers into narratives and guides heart-led messengers to rediscover their worth, weaving intuition and storytelling into a new kind of financial freedom, one rooted in healing, purpose, and prosperity. Welcome, Steph. I'm super excited to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Katja. It's awesome to be here with you.
And I'm just curious, was there a special event that led you to this path?
The first thought that came to mind was when I was in corporate finance, doing work that I was getting lots of accolades and money for. Um, and like my fellow master's degree students were like, "You've got the perfect job," and so forth. Inwardly, I was like, "You have no idea what this job is costing me," because while it was paying me in lots of external ways, I was going emotionally bankrupt, and it got to the point where I just wanted it to all stop.
Mm.
And just like in your book and often in your stories, you talk about, the loss of your boyfriend at a young age. For me, it was the loss of my life. And just, how do I recover from that? And initially it was like, okay, well, let's just go back to what I know and just find a different job somewhere else. And it wasn't until I kind of went down that route and realized that that wasn't the answer, that I needed to look for something different. And it's kind of surprising, and maybe not so surprising, that uh, as I was getting close to making this transition, my body was also sending me signals, sending me messages. And this time it was in the form of whooping cough. And I had a case of whooping cough so bad that when I would cough, I would literally pass out. So I would just black out. Um, and it was something that I had to figure out, how do I get through this? But I also had to take some time off from work, because passing out while you're punching numbers isn't really a recipe for success. So took some time off, and while I was taking some time off, I started doing some artwork and started putting my roles in life on a spiral. And I put down, like father and husband, at the time church member, and so forth. And at the very end of that spiral, going outward, was the word healer. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I'm not a healer. And took some time to like really figure out, what does that mean, and why me, and why now, and so forth. And it wasn't, and the first person that I had to heal was myself, and figure out, how do I go from severely depressed, and honestly, trigger warning for anybody dealing with some difficult times right now. I talk pretty openly about suicide.
Mm.
Um, and that was part of my journey, was how do I initially just live to the next day? How do I make it to tomorrow? And honestly, how do I also make it so that it's a little bit easier to make it to tomorrow? And a couple of things that I latched onto were, one, that it didn't have to all change overnight, that I could make small deposits in my emotional bank account. And I came across the idea in the book Delivering Happiness, I think it was, by the Tony Hsieh, who was the founder of Zappos, the shoe company that that Amazon eventually bought. But in Zappos, one of the key principles was just making things 1% incrementally better. And then if you could just make things 1% better day after day, that after the course of a year, you actually got a 3,800% return on investment. So 1% seems like nothing, but cumulatively it adds up to a lot. And so I ask myself day after day, how can I make tomorrow better than it was today? And eventually, not only did I work my way out of the depression, but also work my way into a much more satisfying, fulfilling life.
Thank you so much for sharing that journey so openly and vulnerably, because I feel like this is a way for us to also inspire and help others to let them know that there is brighter days ahead. So just finding a way to continue minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day. And it will get better if you seek support and help, just wanting to let everyone know that you're not alone. So reach out if needed. And based on your path, what would you say is one of the classes in your spiritual curriculum that I talk about in my book, that if we are in the Earth School, what's one of the classes that you signed up for?
I will answer that in two ways. The first way is the path that I found, well, that I've been on for a while, and that was as a corporate accountant, my job was to improve the profitability of the corporations that I work for, right? And what I realized on my healing journey was that it's not just about the money, it's about the value. It's about, and I mean that not just in financial ways, but honestly, more importantly, in more spiritual, more emotional, more holistic ways, that that I had to find my own value, and also in the work that I do now is to help others to do that too, and to claim their value. So that's one course that I signed up for, although not realizing it until maybe I was at the final exam, and it's like, okay. But I also had a direct experience in reading your book that I didn't realize, something that I've been working on for, I don't know how many years, but a lot of years, is my relationship with my grandmother, who died when I was 8 years old. And some things happened in that relationship that were traumatic. And part of it was, and I'm not going to go into details. For one, I don't really remember the details. I just know that there were results that were not good. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you another story about that in a moment, that's more recent. And I'm like, how do I resolve this when I don't remember the details? I don't remember exactly what happened. She's been gone for 50 years. And what I realized while I was reading your book was that I don't have to, that I can forgive without remembering the details, that I can just like let go of the things that weren't, well, that aren't present, aren't obvious, etc.
Yeah, we can.
And as I'm sharing this, on the first of this month, I was in a hit and run accident, and it happened at night, and all I could see were the headlights coming to me, and then felt the impact, and then the next thing I know, the other car was gone. And when the emergency professionals came, there were just signs of the accident, like there were some broken pieces from their car, and my car, which ended up being totaled, was just impacted. And the reason I bring that up now is I don't have the details. I can't, like when I was talking to the insurance companies, they're like, well, what kind of model and make was the car? And I have no idea. I don't know what the details are, and I don't have to know the details in order to know that my life was impacted, that my car was impacted, that it came at quite a cost. And I could carry a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, which I have experienced with related to that accident. But that doesn't really serve me. It doesn't help me to move forward. It doesn't resolve the issue with the car. It doesn't resolve the issue with, any kind of damage that I experienced myself. And it's really more about, well, how do I heal and how do I move on? And just letting go, forgiving the other person for what they were going through. And realizing also that likely one of the reasons that it happened the way that it did is because they were dealing with stuff that is probably more than what I'm dealing with. Yes, it's inconvenient. Yes, it's frustrating, etc. But I don't know what's going on in their life. Just like I don't know what was going on in my grandmother's life or whatever. And it isn't. I can let go of that. I can forgive without having to be having all the answers. And I'm a person who's very driven by finding the answers. Um, so it can be just not finding the answers can be oftentimes really frustrating for me. But I can let go of that so that I can continue my healing journey.
I love that awareness that you have gained, and I'm so glad that you have found the ability to forgive and let go. Because if we are not in the place where we are, and forgiveness is a process for those who might have not read my book yet, but that is called your spiritual curriculum, but it is a process. And now you are in a place where you have that awareness to see, like, hey, I can let these things go because they impacted me. Yes, it's the awareness, the of that too, acknowledging, but then also letting go and just taking the wisdom that you have gained, the learning, the growth that came after, and maybe also influenced you finding yourself on that healing path. And I love
Mm.
the fact like that you shared earlier, like having that healer on your list of definition, like what's that? Because I have a little bit similar story. I used to work in one of the world's leading business banks, and then feeling the calling to do the work I do today. And that was kind of transformation and shift. But it is having that courage that you have as well to continue on your path and exploring what's there using the m- brilliant mind to ask those questions, because when we ask questions we find often answers, and if we don't find the answers, some things are hidden for a reason, and then it's just accepting that too and letting it go. Oh,
Sometimes that not finding the answer is the answer,
yeah.
right? Like learning how to like let go of it. It would be kind of like dragging around, the car that's no longer working with me, everywhere I go. It's like it, there's no point to it. It's like let it go and
Yeah.
see what's next rather than pulling around this big weight.
Absolutely. And tuning into the work that you feel called to do now is, oh, look at that, a guest star. They, the animals always want to get they moment in the show too, so they are
Yes, they
welcome.
do.
They are
And I've
welcome.
got two of them that are off camera, but they're right here. So
So let's talk about the money story. And I know you work especially with the money story, turning it into a prosperity mantra. So can you share a little bit more about that? What does it mean? And how can someone now, first of all, gain that awareness that they do have a money story? And how can they start the process of transforming it into something that supports them?
so let me preface that by kind of giving a little more insight as to my own journey. So and honestly, while I was reading your book, I was surprised at how often I'm like, wow, that's similar to my story. And I mean, so the fact that we both have finance backgrounds, and, even I didn't go anywhere near the level that you did in martial arts, but I did study martial arts for a while. Anyway, there was just lots of things that were interesting. Anyway, so to answer your question, your money story is, I remember some of my earliest stories that my mother would tell me would be about my grandfather. Well, actually, it was her grandfather. So my great grandfather, who immigrated from England in the middle of the 19th century. So almost 2 centuries ago. And when he came to the United States, he started out just as a coal worker in Missouri and ended up as a real estate salesperson / developer in Los Angeles, and went from, struggling to quite successful financially, and left a financial legacy for my grandfather and for my mother. And by the time I was born, almost all that money was gone, and we were living a very different lifestyle than what she was raised in. And I felt an inner drive to reclaim that financial prosperity. And maybe that's one of the reasons that I fell into getting my degrees in business. First, my undergrad is in marketing, and my master's degree is in accounting. And I managed millions and millions of dollars, which I had some facility for. And then when I burned out, I literally did not want to see a number or a dollar sign for literally, and I mean that extremely literally. Like, I didn't want to go to a store. I didn't want to do my budget anymore. And fortunately, I have a wife that was able to take up the slack. But I ran the totally opposite direction. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I'm like, okay, it's time for me to heal this part of my story and see what that was all about, and reclaim the skills and the experience that I have left behind. And at that point, things began to turn around for me financially as well. And it was, I realized that it was, yes, when I was dealing with money, but money was just the surface level. There was so much more behind that. And part of the reason I think that I burned out in corporate so much was that I was focused on just the dollars. I was focused on the numbers and not the narrative, right? That I was focused on the things having to do with the body and mind, the answers, and, what I could push myself to do. But I was forgetting about my heart and soul. It's like my heart and soul were totally out of the question. In fact, as an illustration of that, I was severely depressed, and I had no idea that I was severely depressed because I wasn't in the habit of checking in with my emotions. And so I found myself in a really difficult place, probably not unlike people who find themselves in a really difficult place financially. And they're like, how did I get here? And then they need help in order to figure out that path and how to reconcile and how to come back to solvency. That it was through figuring out what was behind, what was my heart and soul being called to, not just what was society and my ambition and ego driving me towards. And I believe if everyone has a story, and sometimes we are conscious of what that story might be, sometimes we find ourselves playing a role that doesn't feel like ours, but we all have the opportunity to become the playwrights of our own lives, right? We can take our story and say, what can I do with this? And how can I turn this into something positive, turn a tragedy into a triumph? And it's in that discovery of what that story is that we really can find who we are, what our message is, and how we can have the impact that we desire to have, and that we're really being called to have. And as another point to that, I love etymology, and one of the words that really sticks with me is the word desire. And if you look at the etymology of that word, the DE part of it means of or from, and the SIRE part of desire means stars. So our desires are things that are calling to us from the stars. right? There are things that are beyond this earthly school that we may be in.
I love that. That is a really great way to redefine or actually bring the original definition of desire forefront.
Yeah, and I find it extremely powerful to be able to take that story. There's an exercise called a 6-word story that you may be familiar with. Like, how do you tell a whole story in 6 words? And one of the examples from that is sometimes attributed to Ernest Hemingway, uh, but the story is baby shoes for sale, never worn. And it's like, that tells a whole story in just a handful of words. So what are the 6 words that tell your story so that you can center that in your life? So if you look at my I don't have another room. Every month I do an exercise to plan out the month, and at the center of that plan, visually, are the words, "Remember your extraordinary value." And that's just kind of like my mantra that reminds me not only of my story, but also why I do what I do and what I'm trying to create in the world is to help others to remember their extraordinary value. So when they get to those dark spots that both of us talk about, that they have something to help them to get to help them to get to the light, put it that way.
Having something, because words have power. So having that positive mantra that they can maybe repeat in their mind or have it written somewhere as a reminder, but having something that supports to take the next step moving forward. So I love that, and it is a really good exercise for all of the listeners to do, to think about what could it be for you. And one of the things though is that I hear that so many purpose-driven messengers, purpose-driven light workers, and many of your clients who struggle with this financial self-sabotage. It seems to be a theme here in the Earth School, something that we are learning to do. So, what patterns do you notice, and how do you help people to move forward from those patterns and from that self-sabotage?
So as an illustration, one of the things that I've had to reconcile in my own life is, and it became particularly prominent after I left corporate, was how do I reconcile the inner artist and the inner accountant in my life, right? The first thing that I did after I left corporate was after realizing that my heart was starving, was just dove headfirst into all kinds of creative expression. Started drawing, started doing a tiny bit of painting, started doing jewelry making, started doing all kinds of creative things. And for the longest time, I thought my artist and my accountant were like loggerheads with one another. They were always in opposition, and they were like, it was more about how do I reconcile those two aspects of myself, right? And that may or may not resonate with everybody, but how many of us struggle to reconcile what's going on in our heart and what's going on in our head, right? And it's not about having one winner over the other. It's figuring out how do we find balance between the two, right? That when we can figure out how do we make the artist and the accountant, in my case, work together rather than in conflict with one another, that we can really move to a place that we otherwise couldn't be. And one of the tools that I use is something I call the prosperity matrix. And it's a diagram, 4 quadrants, and along the horizontal axis is that axis is labeled structure. So it's more like what we do and what we think, and has more to do with kind of the mundane aspects of our lives. And then on the vertical axis is story, and which has more to do with our heart and soul, and what do we imagine, what do we dream, what do we feel, what do we sense, and spending time in both of those areas, finding how we can have both our heart, our soul, our minds, and our bodies working together. We can move from either living in a fantasy world where we're just in our heads and dreaming about things but not actually doing anything, or focusing so much on doing things that we've neglected our heart and soul. As I mentioned, that I've actually found myself in both those places. But it's like, how do we find integration between those two things? How do we find integration between what our heart is telling us and what our head is telling us? And and finding that reconciliation, finding that harmony between those two things is when fulfillment arrives, and where we can actually really be living the life that the stars have been calling for us to live.
That was beautiful because I love that alignment and also the harmony, because it is not one or the other, but like finding that harmony. I really love that way, and seeing things from the maybe soul's perspective to seeing how we can use these experiences for us. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, I want to just get back to, was the extraordinary value, because that is something I feel like many would love to experience more. It just sounds so precious. So, so what does that mean to you? And I just have a feeling that many people forget their value, and because worthiness is something so many of us struggle with, like feeling worthy. We are forgetting the inherent worthiness that we have as we get wounded in life. So can you talk about that, like especially when it comes to money, like what can people do there as remembering that extraordinary value that they do have?
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, having your heart, soul, mind, and body working together. Is that so often when we focus on uh, achievement, when we focus on the accolades that the world tends to applaud, there's sometimes the risk that we run into of forgetting who we are, right? That we're so focused on pleasing others and making other people happy that we forget about making ourselves happy, that we forget about, being the person that we are inherently. And part of that, might be that we might identify differently than the world does, right? We might be of a different gender orientation. We might be of a different sexual orientation. We might be of a different race or class or, socioeconomic standing or whatever. And we are wounded, to use your word, by society and even by ourselves. Oftentimes there's a lot of self-directed phobias and isms that we direct to ourselves, and it's really reclaiming our unique nature, reclaiming that we are extraordinary, that we might be in a lot of ways, in most ways, just like the person down the street, but there's also something about us that makes us unique. And sometimes those things that make us unique might not be applauded, might not be celebrated by, everybody that's around us. And that can be painful, and oftentimes causes us to hide, to go in the closet, or to put our candle under a bushel, or whatever it may be. And it's really reclaiming, being able to step up and say, this is who I am, and celebrating who we are and honoring our own value. And part of that is just getting to know ourselves, being there's a lot of talk around self-care and, taking care of ourselves. But there's a reason why there's so much talk about it. It's because it's essential to who we are. And it's essential to how we show up, financially, socially, emotionally, etc. And that when we invest in ourselves, when we invest in what makes us extraordinary, that we get incredible returns on investment, right? That it's by those small little acts that might not seem like anything significant, like doing our morning gratitudes or evening gratitudes or whatever it might be, or those little acts that help us to recognize, that we are worthy, that we are of value, regardless of what our bank accounts might say, and regardless of what society says, but that we are continually and perpetually and forever worthy and valuable. And it's by coming from that place that we can really start living the life that we were meant to live. And as I was listening to a training this morning, one of the things that I realized is that true prosperity is about a full expression of who we are, right? It's not about suppressing ourselves. It's not about hiding ourselves. It's about allowing ourselves to shine. It's about allowing ourselves to be who we are so that others can see who we are and see themselves in that light as well.
Yeah. And I love that you gave little tips and tools there as like what we can do as the first step to move towards recognizing the extraordinary value that we have. Like practicing gratitude can be one step that moves you forward. So and making things simple, making those microscopic action steps, because that's something that will move you forward, and it's easier to do than taking a giant leap. Like you can start with those tiny steps, because that will move forward. And I know you have also so kindly promised to give us here an experience. So if you are listening in and you want to move from the shame and guilt and fear and all those things in toward remembering your extraordinary value. So would you kindly lead us to this short experience where we can start tapping into, and you can, by the way, come again and again to listen to this one so that you can start reconnecting with your worth and align with the energy of prosperity from within.
So the first invitation is to begin very simply, and that is to just breathe. And I invite you to breathe where you are, to notice where you are in the room, to notice where you may be seated or how your body is supported by the chair, by the floor, by your bed, by the ground, and notice just how things are in this moment. That there is no need to think about the past, no need to worry about the future, but just to be present in this precise moment. And as you are here, as you allow yourself to be in this moment, you can also take stock that there have been all kinds of events in your life, moments of joy, moments of sorrow, moments of confusion, and that each of these moments helps to form the foundation upon which you stand. That each of these moments helps you to be who you are in this present moment. And as you are in this moment, as you think about who you are, where you are on your journey, I want you to imagine seeing a sparkling light that is emanating from the foundation upon which you're standing. And the way that I see that is as if that foundation is made up of a series of rocks that may be small or big or in between, that one of those rocks is glowing, that it's a gem, and that gem is calling to you and within it, emanating from its beauty and its natural brilliance that has been there all along, that it has within it a message that is speaking directly to you, helping you to see that you are enough, that you are extraordinary, and that you have something to share with others, starting with yourself. And if you can just affirm to yourself that you are extraordinary, that you are the person for this moment, for this place, for this message. And even if at first this message might seem unclear, it might be, well, that doesn't, that message may start out in a small whispering kind of way, but that as you place your emphasis and your attention, your love and care on that message, that is both within you and standing below you, holding you up, that message becomes clearer, stronger, and more powerful. That as you give care and attention to that message, that it will light your path and help you to move forward, to be the messenger and the powerful person that you are. And I invite you to tuck that message, that stone, that aura into your heart. You can carry it forward with you throughout the day. And when you are ready, you can open your eyes and carry about your day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And definitely something I want to listen to again. So thank you for that. And now, if the also listeners wants to go deeper with you, because you have given us a lot to think about today. I know you have prepared a gift for those who want to take the next step and go deeper what we have been talking here. So can you share a little bit more about your gift?
Yes, I can. So the gift that I am sharing is called Unlock Your Extraordinary Value. And it's similar to the message that I just shared through that meditation, but it's really looking and seeing that we have a shadow side and we have a light side. And that both of those aspects actually, rather than something to fear or to dread or even or to long for and dream about, but that are messages in both aspects. And as we figure out how to reconcile maybe the discord or the confusion that might arise or between the light and the shadow, that you will see your own worth and your own value and your own path forward more clearly. Because all that you've been given, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful, are truly gifts that can enrich not only your life, but the lives of others as well.
Yeah, very true. So check the show notes below to get that beautiful gift. And now, do you have a special message that you would like to share as we wrap up here?
Well, first of all, thank you, Katja, for this opportunity and for being the beautiful light that you are in the world. You. And as I often end my own recordings, my invitation to all and to ourselves is to be the bright light in someone's dark night.
That is such a beautiful, beautiful message for everyone. So thank you, Stef, for your invaluable insights today and all the work that you do in the world to being that bright light for someone's dark night. And if you enjoyed this interview, please give it thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring content. Leave a comment below with your biggest takeaway. So sending you lots of light and love, and see you in the next video. Thanks once again, Stef, and bye for now.